You were a counterterrorism specialist in some of the most sensitive nations on earth. I'm sure there's lots you can't talk about, but you were given permission to break cover and be here and write a book called Breaking Cover. How in the world did that happen?
Yeah, I mean, as we mentioned earlier, it's kind of shocking how much the CIA lets you talk about. And I got to tell a lot of stories that really show you the ground truth of what it's like to be an intelligence officer, to meet with terrorists, and to gather the intelligence you need to stop terrorist attacks from occurring.
So it happened. Like
Yeah.
you yourself were surprised, though.
I was. And so this book actually was a spiritual calling to share my story, to inspire other people. And so I didn't know if the CIA was going to let me drop cover. But they surprised me, and they did. And then of course, they have to review the book, and the amount of information they let me share was pretty fascinating.
I gotta say, the parts where they blacked out, like it's a sensitive document, was pretty cool. I was like, oh look, the CIA blacked that out. Can I see through it? You can't see through those black parts. I know. Talk to us about what it's really like as compared to maybe what we think.
Yeah, so I committed my life to Christ when I was really little, and I took that commitment very seriously, and I said, wherever you want me, Lord, I will go. And so people often say, did you ever dream of working for the CIA? No, not at all. And but I had a passion for foreign affairs, and so God just kept opening the door for me to get abroad. And then eventually I got hired into the CIA along with my husband, Joseph. And it was a wild and crazy adventure. And I tell people that when you walk with God, He'll take you to places you don't even know exist. Growing up in rural Central Florida, I didn't even know this was an actual job. And He'll empower you to do things that you don't know you're capable of.
And one of those, you gotta tell me about some of the missions that you describe in your book, because part of your job was to take people really who were enemies of the U.S.
Yes.
and make them a trusted source, turn them, basically, extremists.
Right, so what a challenge. So you're meeting with someone who you seem to have nothing in common with. So these are very militant ideologues who think very little of women, and the last thing they think is CIA, female, and you've got to make this connection with this person who's giving you very sensitive information. If it's leaked, if it's mishandled, could get him killed. So you have to work really hard at this interpersonal connection. You have to establish trust with him. You have to show him that you're professional. And for me as a woman, his assumption is that I can't know anything about terrorism or the Middle East. So I have to go out of my way to prove to him that I'm knowledgeable and I know the Middle East and I can speak Arabic. And so you have to do this very quickly in order to get to a place where he says, I like you, I'm going to trust you, and I'm going to share this information with you.
And part of that process actually is sometimes having to lie, right, as an officer. And you have to also discern whether he's telling you the truth. So how hard, especially as a person of faith, is it to tell those untruths? Yeah,
so your whole life, essentially, you're saying you're one thing when you're actually another. So fundamentally, your whole life is living undercover. I guess I would explain it, it's like being a missionary in difficult places. You can't always tell people what you're doing as a missionary.
Right.
Yeah, so I was okay with that, as long as I'm not doing something that's fundamentally hurting another person.
Right,
yeah,
it's for the good.
Absolutely.
And discerning whether he's telling you the truth when he finally does start to talk, how tough is that?
It is fascinating, because what people don't understand is how easy it is to collect information and how very difficult it is to figure out what's good and what's helpful and what might be fabricated information, or when somebody's a double agent feeding you mistruths. And so the idea, you've really got to know your area really well. So I had to understand the Middle East. I had to understand, like when I was in Baghdad, I had to understand Iraqi culture well. And then you read nonverbals, and you look for the things little red flags that he's not being forthcoming with you.
Here's what I really want to know, your most frightening day in the field.
So there was one particular location that we served where there were a lot of kidnappings and carjackings. And in that location, my husband and I told each other, you can never get taken, because people would be taken off the streets of the capital city and sold to Al-Qaeda, and they were always killed. And so that particular day I was driving in the car by myself, and I had a situation in which my car was being surrounded by local men, and I realized that once I was completely surrounded, there was a very high chance that it could go south really quickly. And I had to end up using my car as what we call use your car as a weapon to get out of danger, and that was definitely one of my most scary moments.
And then after that, did you make a rule like I'll never drive alone again in this city?
No, I had to often when my husband was traveling and I was by myself, so you had to get back in your car and do it again.
Wow.
Yeah.
How did you manage that daily risk for you and your husband?
You really have to put your life in the hands of God. And you just had to focus and make sure you had situational awareness. But ultimately, like, my life is in God's hands, and I just have to do the very best I can each day to maximize the time I've been given on this earth.
So good.
Yeah.
You tell a story in the book about a man named Mansour, and he was with Al-Qaeda. He was somebody who had given intelligence in the past. And I think this is cool how the Holy Spirit works with a CIA agent because, or I guess other agents would say it was kind of your gut.
Right.
He'd given good intelligence, you interviewed him, and you just felt like something was off.
Yeah, so I walked away from this debriefing thinking something is wrong here. And it took me several days to like figure it out. And when I finally came to the conclusion of is, he didn't have the ego that I was used to seeing. And when I would ask him questions about his role in Al-Qaeda as an emir, which he'd claimed to be, he shifted. He suddenly started shifting in his seat, and he started sweating, and he started, pulling on his collar, and all these nonverbals that indicate that he felt uncomfortable with the story he was providing me. And I finally realized that he was a fabricator. He was never a member of Al-Qaeda, never mind being an emir or a leader, and he had been parlaying this relationship with the CIA to get money and put food on the table to feed his family.
And you can't blame him for that, but at the same time, you can't use that intelligence.
Right, exactly.
Okay, so you and your husband, there's so much more we could talk about, but you and your husband did leave the CIA and kind of saying to God, okay, I know you want us to leave at this time. What's next? And you ended up being part of one of the most historic airlifts of Iraqi refugees into Slovakia. So tell me that story.
Well, it was just so fascinating. We left the CIA and we were a little bit scared whether we could have an opportunity to do anything so meaningful again. And I think when you say stuff like that to God, He must just laugh. We were partnered with a group of people who said there are some people in Iraq and Syria who have been displaced by ISIS, and if we don't help find a place of refuge for them, then who knows what will happen. And so it was perfect for Joseph and I because we were the ones asked to operationalize this idea. And so we're used to carrying out operations in war zones and difficult places.
And discerning who is a true like Christian refugee, that it was Christian in particular that you were helping, or who was actually trying to slip out as a terrorist.
Right, because we didn't want to put our names in a project and say, we want to help these people and have somebody in the midst of them that was a criminal or a terrorist that could pose a threat to the receiving country. So the ability to vet people and information was absolutely critical for that project.
I know it was insane, and there's so much to it, but that day when you finally saw everyone lift off in the airplane, what was that like?
The emotions of that moment were so overwhelming because that project almost didn't happen so many times. And we were thwarted, it seemed like, at every turn, and as I spell out in the book in great detail. And so when it finally occurred, it was just this huge release of pent-up emotion, and so grateful to God that He had showed His hand in giving these people another chance at safety and freedom, really.
So beautiful.
Yeah.
You know, you give your life to God and you ask Him to write the story, and then He writes this crazy story where you're in the CIA and you're airlifting refugees, and now you're an author. So many unexpected things in your life. What would you say to people who maybe have given their life to Christ but maybe haven't quite signed up for all of that?
Right.
You know, or maybe we're just kind of scared of what He's going to come up with.
I tell people that we have got to trust God, that He knows better than we do what we're capable of. So if He opens a door, walk through it even if you are scared. And there was nothing that I did in the CIA or since the CIA that didn't totally intimidate me, but I did it anyway. And really the bottom line is that ordinary people can do really extraordinary things when their faith is greater than their fear.